Welcome back to Movie Recapped. Today I will show you a crime, drama, mystery film from 2016, titled Manhattan Night. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. A male voice monologues about selling mayhem in newspapers as New York City is shown. An investigative reporter named Porter Wren writes in a notebook as paramedics close up an ambulance. Porter receives a phone call letting him know about another scene, so he drives there in hopes of finding an interesting story to write about. He arrives at the aftermath of an apartment building fire. Porter approaches a Haitian mother holding her young son named Vernon in her arms and asks her what happened. The woman recounts the horror of watching her husband, Demetrius, jump out of their apartment window while on fire and holding Vernon protectively. Demetrius managed to take the brunt of the fall, saving Vernon. The ambulance takes Demetrius away as Porter speaks with a woman. He snaps a few pictures of the family and the apartment for his column in the newspaper, then bids the woman goodbye. Porter contemplates whether his work makes a difference or not. Porter calls his wife, Lisa, as he drives home. She reminds him of chores that need to be done and to remember to have his tuxedo ready for a fancy work function. It's in Porter's best interest to attend or otherwise, the newspaper may cut his column. Later that evening, Porter drinks alone at the bar of his fancy work function. He notices an extremely attractive woman who is also alone. She comes over, introducing herself to be Caroline Crowley, and says she recognizes him from his newspaper column. Caroline mentions that she enjoys his writing. She also mentions that her boyfriend, Charlie, works for the bank that just bought the newspaper Porter works for. Porter jokes that they're all now owned by Mr. Hobbs, the owner of the bank. Porter appears to enjoy their conversation but suddenly asks Caroline if she has an ulterior motive. Caroline says she can't explain her situation right now because it's too complicated, but Porter is welcomed back to her apartment to continue their conversation. Porter asks her if this is about her husband's death, but before Caroline can answer him, an older woman interrupts them and tells Porter that Mr. Hobbs would like to see him. Porter excuses himself from Caroline and follows the older woman through the crowd. Porter is briefly introduced, but Mr. Hobbs doesn't speak with him. Porter is quickly dismissed, and he spots Caroline leaving. He catches her at the exit and asks if the invitation to go back to her place still stands, and she says yes, so they leave together. Porter and Caroline ride in a taxi back to her apartment. After they enter the room, Caroline hands Porter a couple of thick envelopes. Porter opens the envelopes while Caroline makes them drinks and pulls out photos of a man lying in the rubble of a demolished building surrounded by small pieces of jade. The man in the pictures is Caroline's late husband, Simon Crowley. Porter reads the police report aloud as Caroline hands him a drink. Porter holds up a baggie containing the pieces of jade from the crime scene. He reads that the police couldn't figure out how Simon managed to enter the building before it was demolished, for it was surrounded by a locked fence. They also could not identify Simon's cause of death due to the bulldozers and rats that destroyed his body further. Caroline claims she is just as stumped as the police. After Porter reads the police report, Caroline shows him some books written about Simon. Porter flips through them, landing on an article where an interviewer describes Simon as not a nice person, but a great filmmaker. Porter is at a loss, so he leaves. He rides back to his secluded home, which he describes as his safe haven. He doesn't take any of the horrible things he witnesses home with him. Porter tiredly enters his home and goes to sleep. The next morning, Porter's young daughter, Sally, jumps onto her father, who is lying in bed while on the phone. He listens as his boss tells him about another job. Lisa and their son, Tommy, enter the bedroom and tell Porter good morning. Lisa holds up today's newspaper, open to Porter's column about the tragic apartment fire and death of Demetrius. At this moment, the family's babysitter, Josephine, enters the bedroom and tells the two kids to get dressed. Lisa and Josephine wrangle Sally and Tommy out of the room while Porter sleepily sits up in bed. Lisa mentions that she'll be working late at the hospital tomorrow night, so she can't attend their dinner. Porter complains that he doesn't want to go without her and that they've rescheduled too many times. Lisa kindly reminds him to get dressed for work and kisses him goodbye. Porter arrives at his office and searches online for articles about Simon Crowley's death. He digs a phone number out of his wallet and calls it, but receives no answer. Porter unwraps a candy from his desk and reads the comic printed on the wrapper. Deciding to call Caroline, Porter speaks with her over the phone, and she invites him over. Porter goes over to her apartment and listens as Caroline explains how she moved from LA to New York. She recounts how she met Simon at a bar one evening. After talking for a few hours, Simon proposed to Caroline. She accepted his proposal that night, and the next day he sent her an engagement ring and a flash drive containing a video of his wedding vows. Caroline plays the video for Porter and explains how they were engaged for 3 days before they were married. She tells Porter how happy they were for many months, but one day Simon didn't come home for 3 days, so Caroline knew something was wrong. Porter regretfully admits to Caroline that he probably can't figure out the mystery of Simon's death. He rises from the couch and stands close to Caroline. They stare into each other's eyes, but before it goes any further, Porter leaves. After pressing the elevator button, Porter realizes he forgot his phone in Caroline's apartment. He turns around and knocks on her door, but receives no answer. Because he remembers her door passcode from the first time he was there, Porter enters Caroline's apartment. He finds his phone where he left it on the coffee table. Porter makes his way quietly down the hall towards the bathroom when he hears water running. He peeks inside the bathroom and sees Caroline playing with herself in the shower. She notices his presence and gasps in shock, turning away to hide. Porter profusely apologizes while backing away. Caroline wraps herself in a towel and follows him into the hallway where she flirts with him. She teasingly drops her towel, and Porter pushes her up against the bathroom wall, kissing her passionately. He turns Caroline around to face the wall and makes love with her. After they finish, Porter leaves, taking the envelopes containing Simon's files. He returns home to find Lisa giving their kids a bath. Later, Porter goes to the demolished building where Simon was found dead. He visits the building next door and asks a worker why he thinks Simon would have a key, but the worker doesn't have an answer. Afterward, Porter meets Caroline at a coffee shop for lunch. She tells Porter that Charlie wants to buy them a house in New Jersey. Caroline says that the only person she can talk to about Simon is Porter. After lunch, Caroline takes Porter to a bank and leads him into a vault. This is where she keeps all of Simon's cameras and memory cards that contain his videos. Caroline leaves Porter in the vault with the instruction to watch everything. Porter sets up the first video and sees Caroline and Simon on a couch laughing and kissing. The second video is of Simon and his friend, Billy, picking up a girl. The next is of Caroline being watched through her and Simon's apartment peephole as Simon asks her a series of personal questions. Porter receives a phone call. The man on the phone says Mr. Hobbs would like to meet with him, so Porter leaves the bank vault and attempts to hail a taxi. Porter hesitates as he notices a suspicious man watching him. He approaches the man, but the man runs away. Porter gives chase but ultimately loses him in the city. Porter gives up and continues to his meeting with Mr. Hobbs. In his office, Mr. Hobbs reveals that he knows about Porter's affair with Caroline and threatens to fire him and ruin his life if he doesn't do something for him. Mr. Hobbs says that he suspects Caroline of threatening him with the release of a video of the two of them being intimate, so Porter must steal it from her before it's distributed. That evening, Porter and Lisa talk while getting ready for bed. Porter listens to Lisa talk about a strange woman in the hospital who faked her pain. Lisa lays down in bed. As Porter pulls her to him, they start doing the business. Porter wakes up later that night and texts Caroline. After he gets access to the bank vault, he continues watching the videos one by one. The content ranges from a couple making out at a party to a man repairing an elevator. Porter goes through dozens of memory cards with no leads. He walks over to a pile of Simon's pens and picks one up. Porter realizes this pen actually has a secret camera in it, so he watches its video. He sees Simon on the floor surrounded by sleeping pills. Caroline enters their apartment and runs to Simon worriedly. She frantically calls for help when Simon won't wake up, but Simon suddenly jumps up and scares her, revealing it was just a joke. Caroline storms off in anger. Porter returns to Caroline's apartment for a drink. They chat, but their conversation quickly dies down and turns into something more intimate, causing Porter and Caroline to sleep together. Afterward, they lie in bed together and talk. Caroline reveals that she visited Lisa at the hospital, so Porter demands that she never makes contact with her again. Caroline asks Porter many intimate questions about his wife, then asks Porter if he loves her. Shortly after they leave the bed, Porter tells Caroline about Mr. Hobbs' suspicions of her. Caroline denies that she is guilty and tells Porter that she's in trouble. She tells him that she and Simon made a bet many months ago. The conditions were that Simon must hold the hand of someone about to die, and Caroline must make love with someone unexpected and record-proof. Simon hands her his pen camera, and they each head off on their respective missions. In a hotel lobby, Caroline spots Mr. Hobbs by chance. She bribes a hotel worker for his room number and then she seduces him. After she gets home, Simon takes the camera pen from Caroline without letting her watch the recording. Caroline also finds out that Simon didn't withhold his end of the deal, so she becomes very upset with him. Porter still feels like Caroline isn't being honest with him, but she says that she's told him everything. Porter gets frustrated and leaves her apartment. Before Porter makes it home, he's stopped by a couple of Mr. Hobbs' men who demand the video memory card. They don't believe Porter when he says he doesn't have it, so they beat him up and threaten to invade his home if he doesn't give it up. The men leave and Porter goes home. Lisa finds him hunched over their bathroom sink cleaning himself. When she asks what happened, Porter lies and says he was randomly jumped. The next morning, Porter visits the nursing home where Simon's father, Frank Crowley, is homed. He asks Frank if Simon left a memory card or a camera with him, but Frank doesn't answer. He only sits in his wheelchair silently. Porter searches through Frank's room and finds a camera recorder in a drawer. He takes the memory card out and examines it. Suddenly, Porter receives an urgent text from Lisa. He calls her and rushes to the hospital. Standing over the hospital bed that holds his son, Porter listens as Lisa explains how a man broke into their house to search for something, then shot Tommy in the upper right arm. Lisa tells him that Tommy will need extensive surgery and physical therapy to recover. When she asks if Porter knew who the man was, he says he might know. Lisa takes the kids to her mother's house to keep them safe. Porter goes to Mr. Hobbs' gatekeeper, Campbell, in order to find Mr. Hobbs. Porter chokes Campbell with a wire and threatens to kill him if he doesn't reveal where Mr. Hobbs is. Campbell calls Mr. Hobbs, and Porter demands that he call off his goons or he'll release the video footage. Mr. Hobbs tells Porter that he has 24 hours to give him the video memory card. Porter returns home that night and watches another one of Simon's videos. In this video, he sees Frank and a woman named Norma Siegel at the nursing home. Mrs. Siegel gives Frank and Simon a moment alone. Simon tells Frank that he doesn't blame him for what happened to his mother and that he loves him. Porter tracks down Mrs. Siegel and learns that she visits Frank twice a week. He uses her spare key to break into her home at night. He searches the house for any leads, uncovering financial files that reveal Simon's company pays Mrs. Siegel. Porter hears someone enter the house, so he hides. Mrs. Siegel finds Porter in her home and begs him to not hurt her. Porter introduces himself quickly as a friend of Caroline's, which gains her trust. Mrs. Siegel tells him that ever since her own son tragically drowned at a young age, Simon was like her son. To show her gratitude for all that Simon does for her, she visits Frank twice a week. Ever since Simon started making money, he gives Mrs. Siegel thousands of dollars a week. In return, Simon asks that she sends copies of a video memory card to a certain address. Porter asks for the memory cards, and Mrs. Siegel gives the last one left to him. Porter watches the video, seeing Mr. Hobbs and Caroline talk in a hotel room. Mr. Hobbs tells Caroline about how he fell in love with a street girl when he was 20 years old. One night, he was attacked by a group of men and stabbed many times in the groin, leaving him severely disfigured. He shows Caroline, and she comforts him. In return, Caroline tells Mr. Hobbs an emotional story from her childhood about her stepfather and a horse, but the video's audio is too quiet for Porter to hear the story. Mr. Hobbs comforts Caroline and says he wants to do something for her. Mr. Hobbs is showing his skills to Caroline. Porter speeds up the video, watching as Mr. Hobbs and Caroline finish and get dressed. Porter brings the tape to Mr. Hobbs and tells him that it wasn't Caroline who threatened to distribute the video, but an innocent woman operating under the orders of Simon. Mr. Hobbs gives Porter a mysterious key his men found in Caroline's apartment. Porter returns to the demolished building and is greeted by a worker who shows him the building's floor plans. He realizes there is an elevator hidden underneath the rubble that the police never investigated, so he digs it up. Using a rope to climb down the dark elevator shaft and a flashlight to see, Porter spots a broken jade horse head amidst the rubble. He also finds another memory card inside some electronics attached to the elevator, so he plays the video on a portable camera. The video is security footage of Caroline, who is holding a gallon of milk, and Simon in the elevator riding up. When they reach the top floor and step out, Simon locks the elevator, effectively trapping them. Simon sits down and insists Caroline speaks with him despite her insistence to leave. He pulls out the jade horse that was gifted to Caroline by Mr. Hobbs after their night together. Simon demands that Caroline tells him her childhood story she shared with Mr. Hobbs, but she refuses. Simon refuses to let them out until she does. He informs her that if she doesn't tell him soon enough, they'll both be demolished along with the building. Simon smashes the jade horse in anger and throws the key to the elevator lock. When Caroline crawls to the key, Simon locks a cuff around her ankle, shackling her to the elevator. He then drinks the milk and swallows the actual key to the padlock on her ankle. Simon demands to hear the story, but Caroline refuses once more, so he presses a button that sends the elevator down. Caroline is dragged across the floor towards the elevator shaft. She frantically tries to stop herself before she falls off the edge. Right before she falls, Simon stops the elevator. He leans over her as she breathes heavily, waiting to hear her story. All of a sudden, Caroline grabs a piece of metal from the floor and attacks Simon. He clutches uselessly at his neck and falls to the floor. Caroline lifts up Simon's shirt to retrieve the key to her shackle. As Porter watches this unfold on video, he looks down at the key in his hand in grotesque understanding. Porter leaves the elevator shaft and walks down the street. He calls Caroline and tells her he returned the video to Mr. Hobbs. They promise to meet for breakfast the next morning to talk more. The next morning, Caroline shows Porter her engagement ring given to her by Charlie. He congratulates her, then shows her the jade horse head he found the night before. Caroline pretends to not know what it is, but when Porter tells her that whole night was recorded, she drops the act. He gives her a copy of the security footage and tells her that he has the original. He threatens to release it if Caroline ever comes near his wife or family again, and she promises she won't. He asks her if she would tell him her childhood story, so she does. She explains that when she was 9 years old, she wanted a horse. She begged her stepfather, Ron, to get her one, but he would say no and hit her while her mother did nothing to protect her. One night, Ron said if he could do whatever he wants to Caroline, then he would buy her a horse. For a week, Ron would take advantage and abuse Caroline, but she still never got a horse. She threatened to tell her mother what he was doing to her, so he promised to get her a horse tomorrow. The next day, Ron drives Caroline to a farm and shows her a horse, telling her it's hers. Caroline gets extremely excited, but before she can speak, Ron shoots the horse and kills it while Caroline watches horrified. Caroline ends her story, and Porter leaves, tenderly touching her cheek as he says goodbye. Porter never told Lisa about what happened, letting her assume the worst. He drives by Caroline's new home sometimes to see her living her new life in New Jersey with Charlie. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.